A very, very good afternoon and an even warmer welcome than usual to Dan Really Likes Wine with Norman Goodfellows, because as you can see from the veneer and sheen upon my forehead, it is rather warm. And if you're thinking, well, hang on, Dan, it's not that warm today in Johannesburg. Well, I'm not in Johannesburg. The background is a little different to the Dan Really Likes Wine cellar. I am, in fact, in Bonnievale, and I just fought my way through late afternoon rush hour traffic in downtown Bonnievale to get to the Angora Stud Farm, which is stop one on a rather cool few days with the Mercedes-Benz team in my ambassadorial role. We've been doing a classic car road trip. Everybody else on this road trip is in vintage SLs, some dating back to the original year of Mercedes-Benz SL, which is 1954. And I was very envious when I saw all of their classic cars when we lined up this morning, because I'm in the newest of the SLs, the brand new one. But when the temperature gauge hit 40 degrees and I was inside a car with air conditioning, I was quite happy with my choice of vehicle. It's a lot of fun with Valdo, the president of the club, and his team, exploring the potential and capability of some terrific cars, but also seeing a beautiful part of the world. It included going over the Trudeau Pass, which is so beautiful. I stopped 8 times to take photographs, making our way through there, down into the town of Barrydale, and then through to Bonnievale, all of which allowed me to go past a number of wine farms. And in fact, I stopped off at one this afternoon. The first time I got to meet Mayor Joubert, the brother of Skulk Willem, who is the former Rupert and Rothschild winemaker, now winemaker at Tybosh. Well, this is the territory in which the 4 Joubert brothers and 1 Joubert sister grew up, Barrydale and its surrounds. Mayor is now farming, making his Joubert Trudeau wine, which had some excellent Chardonnay, all done in second, third, and fourth fill barrels, and that lovely balance of just a nudge of wood set against some beautiful fruit, and some Cabernet Franc. It was probably slightly too warm a day to be drinking too much Cabernet Franc, but another example of the renaissance of Cabernet Franc in its own right in South Africa. So a splendid way in which to kick off a very busy week, a couple of days exploring the Mercedes-Benz team, and then from Wednesday on to Fancourt for the Dimension Data Pro-Am, and Thursday's show will feature the team from Boschendal and a couple of special guests. Boschendal, the official wine of the tournament, and Ina Marie Bruer, the winemaker, will be with us, along with some mystery guests who we will unearth on Thursday's show, which will come the day after Valentine's Day. And so we thought, well, rather than do a show after Valentine's Day and give you all sorts of advice you could have used the day before, we thought we'd do a Valentine's Day special today and throw forward to Wednesday. If you've forgotten it was Valentine's Day, we'll get it into the diary very quickly. The opportunity to speak to 3 people who focus on a style of wine that is so appropriate for the celebration of love that is Valentine's Day. And that, needless to say, is bubbles. And so we have on the show today one of the great Cup Classique makers, the masters of the art, Jeff Grier from Villiers. They've had a really interesting journey over the last few years as they move into a new space. Jeff is an inspiration to so many of our current winemakers, and he'll be talking us through not just his Cup Classique, but what makes Cup Classique Cup Classique. It is Cup Classique because we can't call it champagne. We do have champagne, though, on the show. Great Domains join us. Now, normally it's Derek Kilpin. Thankfully, we've upgraded dramatically. We have Simon Crawley from Great Domains instead, who's something of an expert on the subject of Lanson, which is not just a brand with great history, but a brand that consistently makes some outstanding champagne. And then to complete the best known trio of bubbles, certainly for those of us in South Africa, one that is finding greater and greater favor with every passing summer around the world, and that is Prosecco. And I don't think there's a better known brand in South Africa than Valdo. And so Liandrie Koekemoer joins us to talk us through Prosecco, how it's made, what makes it different from champagne, from Cup Classique, and just how has Valdo done quite so well all around the world. So 3 great bubbles brands to discuss and revel in, perhaps help you as you look to put together your wine list for celebrations come Wednesday. Before we dive into today's show, though, and before I dive into the swimming pool straight after the show, let's dive into some news and see what's been happening in the wine world. Well, this is coming up at Inzameid, an estate that literally 2-3 years ago, so many people had barely heard of. A couple of very successful appearances on the Prescient Reports with Wine Mag later, and they are one of the hotter properties in local wine. And they also do a lot of fun stuff. This is coming up on the 13th of April, so a fair bit of warning for you. The chance to head out to Inzameid and join them at their harvest celebration. Quite a few of the wine estates are doing something similar over the coming months as a harvest that in many cases has arrived surprisingly early, gets celebrated in winemaking style. There's going to be food, music, and loads of great wine. If you're interested, Inzameid's website is the place to go. I think you're in for a very special day if you can make it. And from the winemaking world, Stark Conde is no longer the home of Rutger van Veek. He has said goodbye to the estate that he made such a name for himself at, and instead finds himself out in Wellington going forward at Doolhof. He'll also be working on his own brand, which is done really well. His Curatora Pinot Noir is exceptional. But this is a big coup for Doolhof. I think that Rutger is one of the most exciting young winemakers in the country. I suspect he will be our first winemaker of colour on the Cape Winemakers Guild, and he is just somebody I held in very, very high esteem. He's made some brilliant wine over the years at Stark Conde, and he now takes that talent off to Doolhof. And I suspect there will be all smiles at Doolhof, and we're looking to have Rutger on the show in the coming weeks to get some news behind that move and why he feels this is the right chapter for him to embark upon in his young wine career. And this, if you still haven't thought of something to do for Valentine's evening, you've only got 2 days to go. There are, when I checked earlier, you can't hold me to account on this, but I think there are still some tickets available for the Murati Farm Kitchen. I was at Murati last weekend, hosting the Cape Wine Auction, which was a very, very successful day out, and in no small part thanks to our host venue. Reg Melk and his team looked after us superbly, and this is a chance to head back out there if you were at the auction, to go out there for the first time if you weren't or haven't been before. Live music, bubbles on arrival appropriately, and a night of great food and wine and young love at Murati on Wednesday. So put that one in the diary as a possible option to celebrate Valentine's Day. All right, I'm actually looking out the window, and that swimming pool is very, very appealing. I have to see if I can make it through the entire show without heading out and leaping in excitedly. But I have incentive to stay on the show because I've got 3 wonderful guests with me to talk through the world of bubbles and the excitement therein. Jeff Grier is an icon of South African winemaking, one of the founding fathers of bubbles in particular, and through Villiers has created such a solid and celebrated name in South African wine. Lanson is one of the great names of French champagne, and Great Domains is one of the great houses of wine import in South Africa. And Simon Crawley is our guest therein. And Liandrie Koekemoer joins us with the Valdo brand that has introduced so many people, especially here in South Africa, to the joys of prosecco, something my dear mother would bath in if she had the opportunity. Jeff, Liandrie, Simon, lovely to have you all on the show, and a warm welcome. Thank you for joining us. Happy Valentine's Day in advance as we build up to Wednesday, a day when all 3 of you, I'm sure, will be seeing fairly substantial sales, because bubbles is so significant when it comes to celebrating the 14th of February, and doing so with Cup Classique, with champagne, with prosecco. We've all got a slightly different space. Jeff, kicking off with you as a bubbles winemaker, just give people a little bit of a reminder for those for whom the categories are perhaps a touch blurred, the history of Cup Classique in South Africa, and how this particular name and this interpretation came about.
Yes, Dan, thanks very much for the opportunity. Cup Classique is an exciting category in South Africa, and it's experiencing some good growth. And in 1992, there were 12 producers of bottle fermented sparkling wine in South Africa, and we got together to kind of get behind a generic marketing campaign, and we formed an association, and we had to come up with a name. And so we came up with Cup Classique. So Cup is basically a bit of a Frenchified version of the cape, but it also includes this idea of the crown cap that gets used to close the bottle for the second fermentation. And Classique is a reference to the classic method that gets utilized to make the wine. And the classic method, of course, originates in Champagne. They started in the late 1700s and have perfected that method over time. So we, of course, didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and we utilized the classic or traditional method. And we created the Cup Classique Association in 1992, and it's gone from strength to strength. Today, there are about 130, 140 producers of Cup Classique, many of whom produce more than one brand. And so there's a lot to choose from. And it's an exciting category. Yeah, that's basically the history, Dan. I can talk a bit more about the process if you wish, but for the time being, that's the history.
Well, I'd love to get into that process in just a moment, but what I'd like to do, given we're in a week of love, is get a bit more on your love of bubbles, because it's clearly more than just, here's something else we can make around the world and I'm a winemaker, so I shall make it. You obviously very early on in your career fell in love with Cup Classique and the production thereof. What sparked this love affair?
Yeah, certainly. I am absolutely passionate about bubbly, and when we bought Villiers in 1983, we had to find something that we could hang our hat on, that we would sort of become specialists in. And bottle fermented bubbly wasn't being widely produced at the time. It was only really Simonsig and Boschendal that started with it. And we met a champagne producer in 83 who just pitched up here and said he can't understand why we're not making more bottle fermented bubbly in South Africa. And we sat around a table, drank a couple of bottles of wine together, and as one does in the wine business, once you've got your tongue loosened a bit and you've spent 2 hours together with a stranger, you are very good friends. And we felt after 2 hours that we trusted this guy enough to sign a royalty agreement. And in return, he gave us the benefit of generations of know-how that had been handed down through his family. And we have never looked back. I mean, it fast-tracked us to being on the right path. And the passion that I have for bubbly was enhanced by being able to go to Champagne on regular visits. For the first 3 vintages, 84, 85, 86, I was there with Jean-Louis Denois. And, I had the opportunity to see all the great, the Grand Marque, and spend that time there. And that really did, improve my love for bubbly. But today, there's so many passionate bubbly producers in South Africa that we don't even need to spend that much time in Champagne anymore. It's the same desire and passion exists here, and it's a really exciting category. And yeah, of course, it slots in with Valentine's Day. I mean, in those days, I read that little thing that you mentioned earlier, that bubbly is the drink of love. And there's a scientific bit of research done that demonstrates that it's not just said that it's that. There's a bit of science behind it. There are pheromones which exist in Pinot Noir, and these pheromones certainly enhance the libido, scientifically proven. And if you've got a little bit of bubble in the glass, that helps to take it into your nasal passages and affect the brain and the thought process quicker. So that's why we reckon it's the ideal drink for Valentine's Day, especially the rosé, because the color pink is perfect.
It is indeed, and it's one to celebrate not just Valentine's Day with, but also to celebrate Villiers with, because it is 40 years of Villiers and making bubbles there. And we'll come back to Jeff in just a moment on the making of it and what makes Villiers itself quite so special. There is a long history now of making Cup Classique in South Africa. It goes back more than half a century. It does go back even longer, though, back in Champagne and the original home. Give us a history lesson here, Simon, in as much as you can muster one up for us on short notice. How far do we go back to discover Champagne in France? What's the history and heritage of bubbles as part of the wine offering of France?
Hi, Dan. Yeah, thanks for having us on the show. Sorry, my backdrop is not as attractive as everyone else's. Another busy day here in Joburg and sitting here at Great Dimension HQ, but with our stockpile of Champagne Lanson not sitting too far away from me. Jeff alluded to some timeline there, and Champagne Lanson, in fact, is sort of one of the oldest houses in existence, having come about in 1760. Their whole story is a bit of romance, a little bit of tragedy, and a little bit of Renaissance as well. It was a gentleman by the name of Francois Delamotte who married Marie Claude Theresa de Bourgogne, and once they put their mutual vineyard holdings together, that's basically what encouraged Delamotte to establish sort of their own house in 1760. And then it was sort of a good 40 years later where his son, Nicolas Louis, took over. And that's kind of where the whole Maltese cross comes from, on all of the labeling of Lanson. Nicolas Louis was a member of the Order of Malta, and that's the sort of the Maltese cross, and that's there on the label. And then, but the actual name of Lanson only ended up coming about in about 1837, when Jean-Baptiste Lanson, who was an old family friend of theirs, actually took over, and then later became the owner. And that's when the Lanson PFE sort of came about. And it was sort of at that point, kind of around the 1920s, that Lanson and sales of champagne and Lanson really started to take off, and the UK especially became a big market for the bubbles from Champagne, and it was then now you'll only have a handful of so that its connection with the UK, you only have a handful of actually houses in Champagne who carry the Queen's or the royal family's royal warrant on there. I think there's only about 9 in total, and the Champagne Lanson being one of them. So that's sort of a kind of brief history to its background. But in terms of the romance of it, it was Lanson was also one of the first creators of a rosé champagne, and sourcing and incorporating the Pinot Noir grape, which of course attached to Burgundy is sort of regarded as sort of the most hauntingly romantic grape varietals. So they were very much part of Champagne in its infancy, and rosé and the pink bubbles, which have obviously become famous and very much associated with sort of romantic days of celebration. But the tragedy that I allude to was sort of in the kind of about 1990, when that first Gulf War actually unfortunately got underway, and that the oil crisis sent the champagne market into a little bit of a nosedive, and all that magnificent business and sales, to the likes of the UK, sort of came to a sort of a quick halt. And it was actually another champagne house which bought what Lanson was at that time, but they were very much only interested in their prize vineyard holdings, because very soon after the acquisition they sold off the brand, the name, the cellar, and about 5 years worth of stock to another company. So that was the tragedy sort of that I kind of speak of. And then, come to the beginning of the 2000s, in 2006 was when the rebirth kind of began. And we've been working with Lanson in South Africa since about 2015, which also sort of coincided with the new cellar master, Hervé Danton, taking over. And ever since, it's as Dan, as you say, we also great fans of the champagnes, and it's been great sharing them with South Africans, and wonderful things happening, with Lanson, and just doing our best to try and share them with more and more South Africans.
And I think the important part, and we make this point on the show whenever we have wines from around the world, and apologies for the slightly Greek nature of my open linen shirt. It is 41 degrees here at the moment, if you have just joined us, coming to you from the Angora stud farm just outside of Bonnievale. We advocate very strongly the drinking of wines from outside South Africa, not because we aren't proudly South African as a show, but it does give such important context to an understanding of our own wine. Having a bottle of champagne alongside a bottle of Classique is a great way to do exactly that, as is jumping into a bottle of prosecco. And if there is romance that's inherent in a wine, then prosecco would very much be on that list. And I say this with personal experience, having spent some time on the Amalfi Coast last year and wolfed down my fair share of assorted Italian proseccos when I'm in South Africa. It's almost always Valdo, because it's the one that seems to pop up on my horizon time and again. Liandrie, it's been a wonderful success story for you here in South Africa. Take us back beyond that, though. What is the origin of the Valdo story, and how did Valdo Prosecco come to be and come to be such a success?
Awesome. Thank you for being on the show. And I must be honest, like Prosecco, until a couple of years ago, I didn't even know a lot about Prosecco. And since I started with the brand and obviously representing them, I'm like, this is such a lovely brand. And I understand why Prosecco is actually becoming one of the best growing sparkling wines in the world, actually. So, thank you for being on the show. So Valdo actually started very long ago, and in 1926, the Bala family actually started in Valdo Verdine. It's northern Italy, in the province of Veneto. So the family has been in the Prosecco making industry for quite some years, and this is the Marca Oro, the Prosecco Extra Dry that Valdo is known for, is the one that obviously comes from the DOC region in northern Italy. So just like Champagne, Prosecco also has a specific Prosecco region, and where there's there's specifications about how the grape should be grown, and the regulations that the wine farm should comply to. And Vini Italia is the company that is distributing Valdo in South Africa. And we started in 2015, bringing in Valdo in. And I must be honest, it's been increasing every year. Since we've brought in Valdo, we've literally seen growth in Prosecco at least with 10 to 20% every year. I think Prosecco is just so easy on the palate, but obviously we'll get to that a bit later. But it's just so easy on the palate and so drinkable, and I am 100% sure that's why it's become such a popular brand in South Africa. And we've also, Valdo is the first, one of the first importers of Prosecco in South Africa. So that is probably why. Well, that is why it is the most well-known brand of Prosecco in this country. And I'm very excited to see the growth that it's still going to get.
In terms of a style, there is a perceptible difference between a glass of Prosecco and a glass of Champagne or a glass of Classique, which comes down in no small part to the technique employed. In very simple terms that even I would be able to understand, Liandrie, just explain to us how a Prosecco is made, given that it is a different method to the Champoise method that the other two would employ.
Yeah, so with Prosecco, we use the Chamat method or the tank method. So the second fermentation happens in large steel tanks. This is massive steel tanks, about 20,000 liters, where they put the second batch of yeast in, and that while the regulations is at least a minimum of 30 days. At Valdo for the DOC, we do it at least for 45 to 60 days where we ferment it. And so it's a bit different to obviously the champagne and the MCCs where the second fermentation happens in the bottle. So it's the Grier grape, first of all, obviously, that's a lot more, it's a fruitier grape. And because obviously of the yeast being evenly distributed also in the massive steel tanks, the fruitiness of the grape is definitely a lot more prominent, as you would get obviously on the MCCs and the champagnes. And I think that's why a lot of people also obviously prefer it, because it's very easy drinkable. So yeah.
As anybody who's tried to have only one glass of prosecco ever will find out, it's just not possible. That also applies to the wines of Mr. Grier. Jeff, again, in layman's terms, this method that we employ in South Africa for our Cup Classique that mirrors that in Champagne, how is it? How do you produce the magic that is Cup Classique?
Yeah, Dan. So the classic method is what we utilize, and the most important thing is to ensure elegance. So the idea is to take grape varieties that are early ripening, which is a big benefit in South Africa. You can get the harvest done before it gets too hot, and also before other varieties start ripening. And thankfully, Champagne is forced to use early ripening varieties because of the sort of marginal climate. And Chardonnay and Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier are the three varieties that are used there. And in fact, in South Africa, we focus on those three varieties, specifically Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And those varieties aren't overtly fruity. They have the ability to make super elegant wines. But we enhance the elegance by picking by hand, which is a requirement for Cup Classique, but also picking early before the fruit compounds develop in the skins of the grape, and when there's still lovely fresh acidity in the grape, and before the sugar content gets too high, which would convert to a relatively high alcohol, because we have to do a second fermentation in the bottle. And we don't want to start with too much alcohol. So the grapes are early picked when most winemakers are still on the beach in Plett or Romanus. The bubbly producers are out there picking their grapes and making the base wines for Cup Classique. So we pick by hand. We deliver the grapes in small batches, either in 20 kilogram lug boxes or 300 kilogram bins. And the grapes are loaded into the press as a whole, because another requirement for Cup Classique is whole bunch pressing. And whole bunch pressing also avoids the crushing and destalking and release of flavor and tannins. So it's another way of ensuring elegance. And then we go even further by extracting what we call the cuvee, which is 50% of the weight. So from a 1-ton load, you'd get 500 liters of cuvee, which allows you to cut off the quality juice before the pressure goes too high and you start getting too much tannin and or color. Remember, we're using quite a lot of Pinot Noir, and essentially we're making white wine from Pinot Noir. Although if you're making a rosé, you're looking for a little tint of color, and that is normally achieved by producing a little bit of red wine, light quality, delicate red wine, up to about 1% of the volume of your rosé, which is blended in to give you that blush color. But you can also do some longer contact on the skin to get a bit of color for the rosé. But most people do it by blending in red wine, and that's how you get the color in the reds, in the rosés. So essentially, that's the process to create the base wines. And then once we have the base wines, we do a big tasting. Takes a couple of days. Most people are very jealous when we embark on a 2-day tasting, but it's actually quite hard work, and you have to be sure that you're creating the right blend. And we're making a few different blends with a large number of different components. And, we're making a non-vintage white, a non-vintage rosé, a prestige cuvée, a blanc de blanc, and a super premium bubbly. So we need to put all these different blends together, and then we need to basically prepare that base wine for a second fermentation in the bottle. So we have to prepare it, add sugar and yeast. The sugar is designed to give us 6 bars of pressure in the bottle after the second fermentation. And the yeast has to be acclimatized to the conditions in the bottle. So we have to specially prepare it, inoculate the yeast, and put it into a refrigerated area after bottling in order to go through the second fermentation. The second fermentation is about 6 weeks. So we produce 1 bar of pressure a week. And after that, the yeast settles down to the side of the bottle and basically modifies the taste over time. So the minimum length of time on the lease in bottle is 1 year. And for your average non-vintage would be about 18 months on the lease, which is the case with Villiers non-vintage white and rosé. But one of our strap lines in Cup Classique is that it's perfected by time. So we all know that the more time spent on the lease, the richer and more complex the bubbly can become. So for prestige cuvées, which have to fit into a new category called extended lease aging, ELA, you might see that on labels from this year onwards. ELA would be used for your prestige cuvées where you spend more than 3 years on the lease. And we make a prestige cuvée called Munro Brut, which is 6 years on the lease. And that wine is perfected by time. It's got more rich yeasty flavor. And sometimes we would include a portion of barrel fermented base wine to give even more complexity. One of the new trends, as most people know, is that there's the opportunity to use amphora in winemaking, and the Cup Classique producers haven't ignored this trend of using amphora. It's going back to historic times where you use a clay amphora, so you get a little bit of interaction with air, but without the oak. So we actually will be launching a new super premium bubbly this year called Pithos, which is actually the word for a large amphora, which is made from Chardonnay. It's a Blanc de Blanc, and it's a wine that has even more time on the lease. We're going to be launching with a 2016, and it's a very exciting product, and it sort of looks like that, which is a very beautiful package. And we felt after 40 years of experience in this game that it was time to put a super premium on the market. And so that's our production philosophy, and I think you'll find that all Cup Classique producers follow the same process. Some of those things that I mentioned are legal requirements.
The Pithos is, I think, going to be one of the most exciting releases in South Africa this year, not just in the bubbles category, wine as a whole, and along the lines of the Monroe, doing something that I think we don't do enough of in South Africa, and that is taking Cup Classique as wine to have with food rather than simply a glass of celebration. How does that fit in with Prosecco? Liandrie, is there an Italian tradition of Prosecco with food? Is Prosecco we should be doing something more with in a food space in South Africa rather than just happily drinking it in bright sunshine and enjoying it for celebration or time around the pool?
Well, I definitely think the best place to enjoy a Prosecco is definitely next to the pool. That is why you can also drink a lot more. It is not so famous to drink Prosecco with food. I think champagne and MCCs is a lot more popular for that. A lot of people like the prosecco, especially for the reason to drink it before their meals, as a celebration, as maybe just part of their aperitif, as with starters or something like that. But with that said, we also have, for instance, so we have the Rosé Brut. This is actually a spumante. This is not a prosecco. So for something to be called a prosecco, it has to be 85% or more of the Glera grape. So obviously our DOC and our DOCG is 85%. This is actually 100% Glera grape. So we can call it a prosecco. But our Paradise Rosé Brut is actually mixed with Nerello Muscalese, which is obviously a red grape, and that's where they get the beautiful rosé color from. That makes it actually a bit more of a flavorful wine, while spumante. So this one, for instance, I will actually recommend with more food. For instance, it actually pairs well with a steak, not obviously with a heavy sauce, just a basic steak with some veggies and salad. It actually works very well with. And then obviously our DOCG also works very well with food. So it definitely is still, Prosecco is definitely still a food wines, well, Proseccos. You don't just have to drink it before the food, but with light food, salads, and even maybe a light pizza, but nothing too heavy. Otherwise, you are going to overwhelm the taste of the Proseccos.
I like today in Bonnievale, if you happen to be in the area, is a very good day for Prosecco, being still in the 40s at closing in on 6 p.m. Very quickly, Andrew, because I want to ask Simon a similar question. There's already been a touch on the issue of vintage from Jeff. What is that element of Prosecco? Are there some of the houses, Valdo or some of the others, who will produce a year specific, or is the majority of what's produced a non-vintage?
Most Proseccos is non-vintage. Valdo, for instance, have only one that they actually will produce as a vintage. But most Proseccos, it's not known to do a vintage.
All right, which I think actually makes it a little tougher, and we've had this with a number of our winemakers in the past. You're trying to create a style that year in, year out is the same, and that cannot be easy. I'm going to ask Jeff about that in a moment, but for that, Simon, this understanding of a house style, it is so important to the champagne makers. And as a result, we don't tend to see individual vintages come out too often. Tell me a little bit about this balance and what Lanson do to ensure that when you are drinking a Champagne Lanson, it feels like you are drinking a Champagne Lanson, irrelevant of when you are drinking it.
Yeah, Dan, so Jeff was first alluded to the concept of non-vintage, which was also sometimes even confusing because it's a little bit of a misnomer, because the non-vintages are, you could also say, are kind of multi-vintages. And that's exactly why they do make them. And houses like Lanson producing non-vintage is to make sure that year on year they kind of acquiring the same sort of style that people are used to, to such an extent where some people are buying their favorite Brut non-vintage month after month, and don't actually sort of sometimes stop to look to see what's actually happening behind the label. So with Lanson, they work with their own vineyards over sort of 50 hectares of their own, and then they have long-standing contracts and relationships with growers throughout the region. And their flagship being the Black Label, which has stayed the same since its inception in 1938 as Black Label, has always incorporated obviously quite a big proportion of a single vintage. So currently on the market with the Black Label, it's currently made up of the 2018 vintage. And the rest is blended. The 2018 is blended with a whole lot of reserve wine, which Lanson's very famous for because of their history and their cellars. They keep back a wine that they do blend with their vintages to release current releases, and they go through that sort of painstaking process, which Jeff also touched on, about blending, reaching the style that they want to, and then Lanson also, and your mention of food, Lanson plays a big part in wanting their champagnes to be part of a lifestyle, about what people eat, and they, depending on what style champagne is, whether it be the brut with some caviar, or something sweeter, with some food which might be richer, even might have a little bit of spicy heat. There's sort of something for everyone. And then in the case of the black label, which I mentioned, their attachment to Pinot Noir, it's consistently about half Pinot Noir and sort of 30% Chardonnay, and then the balance of that Pinot Meunier, working with close to 100 different crews throughout Champagne. If you ever have the chance to go to the region and go to Lanson, their cellar is quite magnificent, and they have these beautiful stainless steel vats, each emblazoned with the name of the actual the village, the wine that's in there, and from there they will make up their blend based on a certain vintage, and blend it with some reserve wine. And in the case of the black label, which I'm talking about, there's sort of over 30% of the final blend is actually reserve wine. And it's nice. There's houses like Lanson which start providing a little bit more information. So when you buy your bottle of Lanson, you can actually go on the back and follow a QR code, and actually find out exactly what is inside that specific bottle. What was the base vintage? How much reserve wine? Which vintages make up that reserve wine? What to pair it with? So it really does become a sort of an all involving lifestyle experience, with champagne and cuisine.
As Great Domains, you don't just deal in champagne. You've got all sorts of wine. You have Cap Classique as well. Koekemoer, in particular, is one of our marquee South African brands. What broadly, and I know you have a lot of winemakers who come out to South Africa from France, what broadly is the French winemaker view on Cap Classique and the gap that may or may not exist between the two?
Yeah, I think it's really come a long way, and it's thanks to individuals like Jeff and what Villiers have done to put Cap Classique on the map. And yeah, of course, as you said, we work with Colmont, JP Colmont and Paul Gerber, working together in the cellar. And I mean, the feedback has been wonderful. Jeff also mentioned the marginal climate, and what that how that dictates of when you pick, and what that all leads into the style of champagne that ends up getting made. And we have a much warmer climate here in the Southern Hemisphere. But we have, and where you're sitting right now, Dan, and the likes of Bonnievale, there's some magnificent parcels and vineyards of Chardonnay. And, with the expertise of a lot of our winemakers and time spent abroad, not trying to replicate, just trying to bring the very best out of what our grapes can actually do, and how they can express themselves in a bottle of Cap Classique. The feedback is amazing, and we are spoiled nowadays, I think, in South Africa with the quality of Cap Classique. It really is special.
I want all three of our guests to answer the same question in closing, which is what the perfect romantic evening with their chosen wine would be. Before I do that, a note from Andrew Woolgar, who's always a great supporter of the show over in America. Morning, Dan. Enjoying the show while arranging my next shipment to North Carolina. Very interesting to listen to Jeff, and I can't emphasize enough how important the Cap Classique method is, as it really sets the standard and gives comfort to our customers knowing the standards are exacting. I imported several Cap Classiques from the likes of Chamonix, Camberley, Labrie, and Kluivenberg, and the gorgeous Demi-Sec from DGB, which is perfect for Valentine's. Cheers. Andrew's love of wine is most apt this week, and I was a terrific supporter of South African wine. Jeff, before I do ask you and the others that question on the perfect Valentine's evening, which I'm sure you have got planned for Wednesday. Tell me very quickly, from a purist's view, we know that it's 3 grapes and 3 grapes only that dictate champagne. There are similar restrictions, as Liandrie has pointed out, when it comes to prosecco. In South Africa, anything goes anywhere, really. And we have, in particular, some really interesting examples of other grapes. Ken Forrester using Chenin Blanc for bubbles, although, to be fair, Ken Forrester would probably try and make Cabernet Sauvignon out of Chenin Blanc, given half the chance. We've got Cup Classique made out of Colombar, for instance, up at Silverthorne with John Loebscher. This branching out into different spaces, does the purist Jeff beat his chest in fury, or do you think it's a welcome and exciting addition to our offering here in South Africa?
Dan, I think there certainly is place for a little bit of experimentation, especially in the non-vintage category. And I think introducing a bit of uniqueness to your product by the addition of Chenin and or Pinotage makes a lot of sense at a certain level. But as an association, we've basically introduced into law that if you're going the ELA route, extended lease aging route, you have to use Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, or Pinot Meunier. So there is no opportunity for experimentation there. You're using the classic champagne varieties. So anyone buying those wines will know what grapes are involved. But yeah, I mean, why not in the non-vintage category experiment with varieties that might just give you a little bit of uniqueness in the international market. You know, Cup Classique is not a direct competitor to Champagne. And even if we use Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier, we have different climate. As we've mentioned all day today, it's a lot warmer here. I don't know what global warming is going to do to Champagne, but I'm sure it's evening out the vintages. They used to have massive vintage variations. And that's why they have to have this huge amount of reserve wine to even out the character of the wine so that they can consistently produce a non-vintage style. Even here we have reserve wine, but we have smaller proportions blended into our non-vintages just to ensure that we have some continuity. But we can achieve the same level of analysis year after year, really. So Dan, did you want me to go on to my perfect Valentine's drink, or?
I'm going to leave that for the grand finale. Let's head back to Simon, because I know Simon is a great romantic, and I'm sure he and Derek have got a very special dinner plan together for Wednesday. What's the ultimate Lanson love fest for Wednesday for you, Simon?
Yeah, I don't know how my wife will feel about an evening spent with Derek, but yeah, if Lanson's involved, definitely going to try source some wonderful oysters at the beginning to have with some black label, and then move on to the rosé label, non-vintage as well, and you can have all kinds of fun there, and a great piece of tuna or salmon. Just sear it very lightly with a nice sesame crust. And then you can even sort of keep it going and get some lovely fresh strawberries. And if you're kind of looking ahead and you're a tennis fan, to Wimbledon, of which Lanson's been the official champagne for coming on 20 years, you can have some nice rosé label with fresh strawberries and cream. And yeah, doesn't sound like a bad evening to me.
I think I might join you and Derek, and our respective wives can deal with us later. That sounds like a terrific night out of French celebration. What about the Italian celebration? Liandrie, what's the Valdo-soaked day of love hold in store in a perfect world?
Well, I would definitely recommend, obviously, starting with our flagship, the DOC extra dry, using that with a nice starter, something with some oysters maybe, that would be perfect. Oysters and prosecco always go very well together. Moving on to one of our Brut Rosés. We've got 2 different ones. We've got a DOC Brut Rosé, and then we've got the Paradise Spumante Brut Rosé. So you've got 2 different ones to choose from. A salmon, a nice seared salmon with some veggies will definitely do the work there. And then we actually recently launched the Moscato in South Africa. So it's also a Spumante, not a Prosecco, but we've recently brought that into South Africa. A little bit sweet, 75 grams per liter residual sugar. So that will work perfectly with any dessert. I think a nice chocolate mousse or very rich chocolate mousse will complement that very well. There's many restaurants using Valdo this Valentine's Day for their Valentine's dinners. But otherwise, at home dinner with your loved one is always just the best for me as well.
Now, there is also a prize to be won with Valdo if you're shopping at Norman Goodfellows this month, and that's a really nice addition. Just to confirm that quickly, Liandrie, it's a romantic dinner and a Valdo hamper are the prizes. Is that right?
Yes. So please go buy a bottle of Valdo at any of the NGF stores or online on the online store, and you can stand a chance to win a dinner for 2 at Courtyard Waterfall as well. Yes, it's another restaurant in the Cape as well that we're using. So, and with that, a hamper with some nice Valdo gifts and a Valdo bottle. So it's really a special treat. And I mean, all you have to do is just buy 1 bottle. So yeah, there's still time to enter. Hurry, then you can still maybe win that prize for Valentine's evening.
And that would complete a very good Valentine's week indeed. All right, so there are your suggestions. We've gone French, we've got Italian. Let's wrap up in the heart of South African wine country with a veteran romantic. What's going to be lighting up Valentine's Day in the Grier household?
Yeah, Dan, I am a bit of a romantic. In fact, I had a lot of practice last year because it was my 40th wedding anniversary. So I kind of basically opened quite a lot of bottles of bubbly. I mean, bubbly is the thing. And I mean, clearly we've spoken about what food to drink the bubblies with, but most people migrate towards Cup Classique Rosé or Champagne Rosé, but we're talking Cup Classique. And there are quite a few of them on the market. At Villiers, we make a tradition brut, which is delicious with sushi. You always have to combine the color coding is important. And tradition brut goes really well with sushi. It's difficult to imagine something more suitable, but there's a growing demand for nectar bubblies, and I think all Cup Classique producers are producing at least 1 nectar. But we started last year with a nectar white, and this year, towards the end of last year, we put out a nectar rosé. We call it Villiers Pearls of Nectar, and the pearls relate to those strings of bubbles that come up in the glass, which look like strings of pearls. And the nectar, of course, is that indication that it's a bit sweeter. It's in fact a demi-sec. And that with, I think Simon spoke about strawberries. Obviously, that's probably the classic combo. And this is what our Villiers Pearls of Nectar looks like. So, in my home, we'd probably be at least drinking 1 of those bottles, but I might even splash out on something that Simon might be familiar with, just to impress my wife. But I think Cup Classique is impressive enough.
I think it's an excellent selection. And if it's from Villiers, you're guaranteed something with now 40 years of heritage. So last year, 40 years of marriage. This year, 40 years of Cup Classique. The anniversaries keep coming for Jeff Grier and his terrific wine story. Guys, you've given us not just some fabulous insight into the world of Cup Classique, Champagne and Prosecco, but also some great ideas for Wednesday. I'll have to see what I can work into my own romantic celebrations, but I think any of those will work an absolute treat. So thank you all very much indeed. Liandrie, lovely to have you on the show for the first time, and look forward to it being a repeat process. Simon, great to have you as well. Such an improvement on Derek Kilpin, and please pass that on to him from me. And Jeff, always very special, and I look forward to trying that Pithos when it comes out. Tell your diminutive Mark Wahlberg lookalike who runs your marketing team. Get some up to Johannesburg the moment it's ready, and I'm sure we'll be celebrating that with you in person at some point as well. But for now, all of you have a wonderful Valentine's Day. May it be filled with fabulous wine and plenty of love, and thank you all very much for being on the show today.
Thanks, Dan. Go jump in the pool.
Thank you.
That is exactly where I'm headed. I hope the rest of the community shares my belief that it's clothing optional. That does it for today. Liandrie Koekemoer with Valdo, the Prosecco brand that leads the category here in South Africa. Simon, who's down at Great Domains with Champagne Lanson, which is consistently one of my favorite champagnes. And then Jeff Grier, 40 years now making bubbles, a stalwart of the industry and still delivering innovation as the imminently arriving Pithos demonstrates. There are your Valentine's Day guides, so make sure you put them to good use. The swimming pool at the Angora Stud awaits, so I'm off to plunge into that and then continue my trip through the Cape with the Mercedes-Benz Car Club and their range of classics, which wraps up for them later in the week, wraps up for me tomorrow as I head up to Fancourt for the Dimension Data Pro-Am, and on Thursday evening, that is where the show will be coming from, alongside of Nina Marie Bruer, winemaker at Bordeaux, and some very special guests. Until then, have a wonderful Valentine's Day. This is Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows. We'll see you on Thursday. Goodbye.